The flashbulbs in the glass schoolroom shone like the light of a ceremony honoring the people. More than 900 employees crammed into rows of seats, all looking forward to an annual town hall study where the health leadership discussed the composition and future roadmap. The air was supposed to be filled with wind. But today, the light was not meant to be celebratory. It was meant to be the success of a public decision. On stage, CEO Graham Vexler made micro-edits. Wearing a black suit that could measure chronic stress, Keem's voice rang out, from the beginning covered with a sharp, benevolent layer. In any job, there are always people who are assets, and there are also people who are trash. A moment of silence. Then the excited rocket froze the entire hall. Skyler James, you're trash. And from this moment on, you are fired. The sound reverberated through the speakers, hitting the ears of nearly 1,000 people. In a flash, all eyes were on Skyler. She sat in the front row, her short, ash-blonde hair reflecting the light of the glass, making her calm even more obvious. Inside, her heart was strong, but on the outside, she kept a cold silence. No reaction, no tears. Just a motionless mirror, like a statue in the middle of a storm. A whisper passed by. Some eyes opened in surprise. Some eyes drifted away as if looking at her would bring about resentment. In the row near the stage, Maya Torres, the young analyst Skyler had once mentored. Her lips were bleeding, her eyes were red. But she did not get up. Graham's fear was like a shadow pressing down on everyone. Skyler got up, her high heels clicking rhythmically on the glass floor. In her hand, she still held the notes of the merger report that Graham himself had bragged about for months. She gathered them neatly, like a final ritual, and walked away. Each step was like a knock on the tense space. No one was formatted. No one said anything. Only silent, suffocating glances. Graham pockmarked, the corners of his mouth curled up in a vicious satisfaction. The idea script was finished. But the microphone was not turned off. While the solution tilted to the side, the poisonous words escaped, echoing throughout the room. Finally smelled that parasite. There was no engine bell. Some people supported their eyes, some others covered their mouths. Maya lowered her hand, shock. Her eyes gradually lightened. The entire hall froze. There was no laughter. There was no award ceremony that Graham was waiting for. Just silence, thick as a block of concrete. Skyler heard it all. Each word was like a knife solved over time. Trash. Parasite. 2 public slashes. Right in front of the people she had guided, protected, and guided. But she did not respond. It didn't give Graham the pleasure of seeing her tears. She just walked, step by step, as if her silence was the steeliest status report. The door to the conference room closed behind her, but the echoes of the execution lingered. On the long walk back to the office, everything felt heavier than any she had ever experienced in years. Each sequence of actions seemed to drag on endlessly, filled with the avoiding light of her colleagues. Everyone pretended to focus on the screen, pretended to type on the keyboard, but their eyes reflected fear. No one spoke. No one stood by her. At her desk, Carla Jensen, the HR manager, was waiting. Her face was a cold, emotionless mask. On it was an empty box like a final sentence. "You need to increase all the deer today," Carla said, her voice flat, without a trace of emotion. "I'll be standing here when I'm done." Skyler nodded slightly. No argument. No excuses. Her hands began to follow each memory. Photo frames, old mugs, a few notebooks. Colleagues passed by. No one said anything. But someone quietly placed a hand on her shoulder, a quick, shaky, but human touch. The silence was heavier than any words. Helplessness, pain, and suppressed anger. When the last drawer opened, Skyler quieted down. Hidden in the deep corner was a thick column of files, draft merger agreement, final. Her fingers moved quickly through each page until they stopped at the signature section. The bold line read clearly, "Signature of the counter, Compliance Director, Skyler James." That line was blank. A jolt of electricity ran through her. In the moment she was ridiculed as trash, she realized the $4.1 billion deal Graham had meddled in could not have been completed without the primary signature of this parasite. She put the file back down, put it on the bottom of the drawer, and stretched it out, hidden under some meaningless papers. Her face was still calm and serene, as if she could say something unusual. But inside, a fire was just starting. Not necessarily an explosion, but a secondary, sharp sound. Graham believed she had her standards. But little did she know, in her hands, silence was becoming a weapon. It was past midnight on the 26th floor, the kind of night where empty coffee cups outnumbered pens, and the city's skyline glowed like a battlefield of glass. The merger committee had been locked in for hours, papers scattered across the table, voices hoarse from arguments that refused to die. Most of the executives had already left. Only the desperate and the stubborn remained. And Graham Vexler, of course. He paced behind Skyler's chair like a general losing patience with his troops. His tie was loosened, his jaw tight, his ambition burning so hot it made the air feel sharp. "We don't have time for this," he snapped. "Our competitors are circling. This needs to be signed before morning." Skyler didn't look up. Her smoky blonde bob brushed her cheek as she bent over the document. She had built her entire career on compliance, on making sure numbers lined up, disclosures were airtight, contracts couldn't be cracked open and gutted later by regulators. And tonight, she could smell rot beneath the surface of this deal. Corners cut, numbers massaged, truth diluted until it was barely recognizable. If she signed as it stood, the company would be trapped in a billion-dollar coffin, and she would have her name carved into the lid. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, and then slowly, deliberately, she began typing. A clause. Section 14. Technical in wording, but ironclad in effect. No merger exceeding $1 billion may be finalized without counter-signature of the Chief Compliance Officer. Her title. Her name. It was the kind of safeguard most executives would brush past, a footnote buried in the avalanche of pages. But Skyler knew better. She knew one day, she'd need something stronger than hope to survive Graham's empire. Across the table, Daniel Cho, a young lawyer barely a year out of law school, squinted at the new line. He had the kind of eyes that caught details no one wanted noticed. "Excuse me," he said cautiously. "This section here, Section 14, this seems unusual. It puts final authority in the hands of compliance." "That could." "Enough," Graham barked, slapping the stack of papers so hard Daniel flinched. "We don't have time for theory lessons. Just get the signatures we need." Daniel hesitated, his lips parting as if to protest again. Skyler caught his eye. For a second, she let him see the faintest flicker of reassurance, a silent nod. He swallowed his words and looked down, the moment gone. Graham grabbed the draft, scanning with the impatience of a man who never cared about details. His eyes darted over bold numbers, highlighted sections, anything that screamed immediate value. The clause passed beneath his gaze unnoticed. "This is fine," he muttered. "Print it." Skyler lowered her pen to the page. Her hand didn't shake. Her signature flowed steady, precise. Graham thought she was caving to pressure, yielding to his command. But in truth, she was tightening a trap that would take years to spring. He never noticed. He never cared to notice. To Graham, she was just a cog, someone to shuffle papers until his empire grew larger, louder, more untouchable. But Skyler was building something different. Something invisible. A safeguard no arrogance could erase. Back in the present, the memory replayed like a film she'd kept hidden in the back of her mind. As she stared at the binder on her desk, the blank line under her name glared like a spotlight. Trash. Parasite. Graham's words still echoed from the town hall, dripping with venom. But here was the truth in black and white. The deal didn't live or die by him. It lived or died by her. Down the hall, she heard the muted hum of voices. HR waiting like vultures. Assistants pretending to type with nervous fingers. The company had already decided she was done, disposable, erased. Yet none of them knew that the foundation of Graham's $4.1 billion dream balanced on a single stroke of her pen. She slid the binder back into the drawer, covering it with useless papers. Her face remained a mask of compliance, calm, detached. But inside, the memory of that midnight clause burned steady as steel. It hadn't been an accident. It had been foresight. Protection. A silent weapon forged in the quiet hours when no one cared enough to look closer. Graham thought tonight's humiliation was the end of her story. He thought stripping her of dignity in front of nearly 1,000 employees would erase her name from the walls of this company. But she knew the truth. The real story hadn't even begun. And this time, she wasn't just holding back tears. She was holding the future. The first morning after the town hall felt strangely ordinary to the rest of the world. Cars hummed down the street. A neighbor's dog barked at nothing. Sunlight spilled across the kitchen table as if nothing had changed. But inside Skyler's apartment, silence was heavy. Not the comforting kind that lets you breathe, but the kind that presses against your chest until you wonder if the air itself has turned hostile. Her box of belongings sat unopened by the door, a graveyard of 15 years reduced to cardboard. She hadn't touched it. She couldn't. The sight of her framed photos and coffee mugs packed into a box felt like proof of exile, a monument to humiliation. Skyler wrapped her hands around a mug of coffee gone cold. The bitter taste barely registered. What filled her instead was emptiness. Not grief. Not rage. Just a hollow space where her career used to be. Then the phone buzzed. Once. Twice. 3 times. She glanced at the screen. The law firm handling the merger. She let it ring out. Then again. And again. By the 4th call, she recognized the pattern. They weren't just reaching out. They were desperate. Her voicemail filled quickly. Ms. James, we need your counter-signature within 72 hours. Please call us back immediately. She didn't. Instead, she leaned back in her chair and let the silence stretch. Each vibration of the phone was a reminder, not of weakness, but of leverage. For the first time since Graham called her trash in front of nearly 1,000 people, she felt control crawl back into her veins. Not loud. Not vengeful. Quiet. Firm. Unshakable. By noon, her inbox overflowed with emails marked urgent. Most were polite, all professionally worded, begging for efficiency and cooperation. But one stood out. It came from the partner company itself, Ridgewell Partners. The subject line, respectfully requesting your attention. Skyler opened it. Ms. James, we acknowledge your critical role in this agreement. Without your counter-signature, the merger cannot move forward. We value the professionalism you have always demonstrated and ask only for your consideration. Should you choose not to proceed, we will respect your decision. Not once did the message echo Graham's venom. Not once did it call her trash or parasite. It was measured, diplomatic, almost reverent. A tone that recognized her worth even when her own company had stripped it away. Skyler read it twice. Then a 3rd time. And for the first time since the humiliation, something stirred deep in her chest. Not joy. Not triumph. But validation, written in black and white. She didn't rush to reply. She didn't type a single word. Because she understood something Graham never had. Silence could be louder than rage. Across town, Graham was already unraveling. She could picture it clearly. The way he would stalk across the glossy floors of Halloway Systems headquarters, barking into phones, demanding updates, slamming fists against polished wood tables. His empire had been built on bravado, on the illusion of control. But now, that illusion was cracking. And Skyler didn't need to lift a finger. She stepped onto her balcony as the city's skyline flickered alive with the start of evening. Below, life continued as though nothing had happened. Office workers spilling into bars, cabs honking, neon lights buzzing awake. But somewhere in those towers, panic was spreading. Investors refreshing inboxes. Lawyers drafting excuses. Assistants running numbers until their eyes burned. And at the center of it all, one missing signature. Hers. Skyler lifted her cold mug in a silent toast to the night. The man who had humiliated her in front of 998 employees was now discovering, hour by hour, that the woman he called trash was the one holding everything together. And all she had to do was nothing. By the next morning, the silence began to roar. Television anchors spoke of unforeseen contractual hurdles. Stock tickers bled red across the bottom of screens as Halloway Systems shares plummeted. Commentators speculated about a critical authorization missing from the deal. They didn't know her name. They didn't need to. Every word pointed back to her. And in living rooms across the country, ordinary Americans saw through the corporate spin. They recognized arrogance. They recognized cruelty. The town hall clip, 30 seconds of Graham sneering "You're trash. You're fired," had begun spreading online. Viewers were outraged. 15 years of loyalty, and he calls her trash? Unbelievable. No leader should ever treat an employee like that. Public opinion wasn't just turning against Graham. It was sharpening into a knife. Skyler scrolled through the headlines with steady hands. Each article was fuel, but she didn't let it consume her. She didn't gloat. She didn't tweet. She didn't give interviews. Because she didn't have to. Her silence was speaking louder than any defense she could offer. And Graham, loud, blustering, venomous Graham, was being drowned by it. That night, her phone buzzed again. This time, an international number. She hesitated, then answered. "Ms. James," a calm, steady voice said. "This is Richard Hahn, principal investor with Northbridge Capital. I wanted to hear it from you directly. Do you, in fact, hold the counter-signature required to finalize this merger?" Skyler let the question hang in the air. She pictured Graham in his office, red-faced, demanding answers he no longer controlled. She thought of the silence of her colleagues at the town hall, too afraid to speak, and of the word parasite echoing through the microphone. Then she said evenly, "Yes, the clause requires my approval. Without it, the deal cannot proceed." There was no surprise in Richard's reply. Only confirmation. "That explains everything. And I'll be candid, Ms. James, the board is losing confidence in Vexler." Skyler's lips curved, just slightly. The power was no longer his. It was hers. And she hadn't even raised her voice. The boardroom at Halloway Systems was designed to intimidate. Polished mahogany stretched the length of the table, floor-to-ceiling windows cut a gleaming frame of the skyline, and the leather chairs were arranged like a jury prepared to pass judgment. It was the kind of room where voices were supposed to sound commanding, where power was performed like theater. But this morning, the theater had slipped. The transcripts would later show how Graham Vexler started strong. His voice smooth, practiced, leaning on the same arrogance that had carried him through every crisis before. "This is a minor delay," he told them. "A temporary technicality. We'll have it resolved within the week." But the directors weren't nodding this time. They pressed. "How long has this clause existed?" one asked. "Why didn't we know about it?" said another. The questions came sharp, one after the other, and Graham's composure began to splinter. He leaned forward, his tone sharper, his sentences shorter. Sweat dotted his temple, barely hidden beneath the stage lighting. "She's nothing," he snapped. "Skyler James is nothing. She doesn't matter." Those words were etched into the transcript in black ink, but for the directors in the room, they landed like a slap. The memory of the town hall clip, already viral, already dissected across social media, hovered like smoke. They had all seen the outrage, the hashtags, the condemnation. America had already judged Graham's cruelty. And now, in the boardroom, his dismissal sounded less like confidence and more like denial. It was Victor Hale, the most reserved director, who finally cut through. He rarely spoke, and when he did, people listened. His voice was calm, deliberate, almost surgical. "If she's nothing," Hale asked, "then why can't we close the deal without her?" The silence that followed was suffocating. A pause recorded in the transcript as nothing more than long silence, but in reality it pressed against every corner of the room. Graham's jaw tightened. He opened his mouth, but no words came, because the answer was simple. He couldn't. The $4.1 billion deal lived or died on Skyler James. And everyone in the room now knew it. Across the city, Skyler sat in her apartment, a cup of fresh coffee steaming beside her as she scrolled through updates on her phone. A contact she hadn't expected, Carla Jensen from HR, had slipped her a copy of the transcript. Maybe guilt. Maybe rebellion. Skyler didn't care why. She just read. Line by line, she watched Graham unravel. It was strange, almost intoxicating, to see the same man who had sneered at her, who had called her trash in front of nearly 1,000 employees, reduced to stammering in front of his own board. And then she reached Hale's line. "If she's nothing, then why can't we close the deal without her?" Skyler leaned back in her chair, lips curving into something between a laugh and a sneer. For 15 years, she had warned, she had raised alarms, she had fought to keep integrity in the system. And for 15 years, Graham had cut her off mid-sentence, silenced her, turned the board against her with nothing more than a smirk. Now the silence was his. Back in the boardroom, the pressure mounted. Another director spoke, her tone firm, her words chosen with precision. Perhaps we should consider inviting Miss James back as an emergency consultant. If she is the only one who can complete this contract, then logic dictates we need her insight. The suggestion hung in the air, heavy with irony. Only months ago, these same directors had laughed at Graham's jokes when he interrupted Skyler, had nodded along when he dismissed her concerns. Now they were considering bringing her back, not because they wanted her, but because they had no choice. Graham's face flushed red. His fists clenched against the table. Absolutely not. I will not crawl back to her. But his protest sounded brittle. Even he could hear it. Because power was shifting, and he wasn't the one holding it anymore. At that same moment, Skyler's phone buzzed again. An email this time, from Ridgewell Partners. The rival company wasn't just asking for her attention anymore. They were offering her a role. A consultant. Independent of Graham. Free from his shadow, his arrogance, his humiliation. She read the line twice. You will have not only the respect but the autonomy you deserve. Her pulse quickened. It was tempting. The idea of stepping into a boardroom where her voice wouldn't be silenced, where she wouldn't be dismissed as trash but treated as an equal. It was everything Graham had denied her. But Skyler didn't answer. Not yet. Because she understood the power of restraint. Her silence was already tearing Graham's empire apart. In the boardroom, voices overlapped, directors arguing, investors threatening, lawyers warning of regulatory fallout. And in the middle of it all sat Graham, sweating under the weight of his own arrogance, trapped by a clause he had dismissed without reading. Skyler's clause. The cracks were no longer hidden. They were spreading, fast and loud. And for the first time, Graham Vexler wasn't the predator. He was the prey. The call came just after dawn. Skyler had been staring at her ceiling for hours, her body exhausted but her mind too sharp, too restless to sleep. When her phone buzzed, the number flashing across the screen wasn't one she recognized. International. She almost let it ring out, the way she had ignored the lawyers and their endless voicemails. But something in her gut told her to answer. Ms. James, the voice said, smooth and measured. This is Richard Hond, principal investor with Northbridge Capital. Skyler sat up straight, every muscle tightening. Northbridge wasn't just another shareholder. They were the shareholder. The kind of firm that could make or break a company with a single vote, a single statement. I wanted to hear it from you directly, Hond continued. Do you, in fact, hold the counter-signature required to finalize this merger? The silence stretched. Skyler let it. She pictured Graham across town, pacing his office, jaw tight, veins bulging, demanding updates he couldn't control. She thought of his voice echoing in the auditorium. Trash, parasite. She thought of the way nearly 1,000 employees had lowered their eyes rather than meet hers. And then she answered. Calm. Even. Unshakable. Yes. The clause requires my approval. Without it, the deal cannot proceed. Hond didn't flinch. That explains everything. Our analysts suspected as much. But I'll be candid, Ms. James. The board is losing confidence in Vexler. He assured us this process was airtight. It clearly isn't. Skyler leaned against the back of her couch, eyes fixed on the skyline outside her window. Graham's empire was wobbling, and Hond's voice was the sound of the floor cracking beneath it. He called me nothing, Graham had told the board. She doesn't matter. But here was the most powerful investor in the room, acknowledging that she was the keystone. Tell me, Ms. James, Hond said, lowering his tone. Do you intend to use it? The question hit like a shot. Skyler's pulse quickened. She thought of the cardboard box still sitting by the door, the framed photographs, the coffee mug that had once lived on her desk. She thought of the humiliation, the sting of laughter that never came, the silence of colleagues too afraid to speak. And then she thought of Section 14, the clause no one read, the safeguard she had planted like a seed in the middle of a sleepless night. "I haven't made a decision," she said finally. Her voice was level, but her chest burned with vindication. "That's fair," Han replied. "But understand this. If you choose not to sign, Northbridge will reconsider its stake. Vexler can't afford that. He knows it, and so do you." The line went quiet. Han wasn't threatening. He wasn't pleading. He was stating facts, the way gravity doesn't ask for permission before pulling you down. "Thank you for your time, Ms. James," he said, and then the call ended. Skyler sat frozen for a moment, phone still in her hand. She wasn't just the missing piece anymore. She was the fulcrum on which billions balanced. Across town, Graham was losing his grip. Reports from inside the company painted the picture vividly. He stormed into meetings, barking at assistants, slamming his fists against the table. He ranted about betrayal, about ungrateful employees, about parasites trying to sabotage him. But behind the bluster, panic bled through. Directors whispered among themselves. Some openly questioned whether Graham's ego had finally outpaced his ability to lead. Others quietly reached out to Ridgewell partners, exploring contingency plans in case the merger collapsed. And every conversation circled back to the same name, Skyler James. The woman Graham had humiliated in front of nearly 1,000 people was now the only person who could save his empire. By evening, Skyler's inbox pulsed with new emails. Desperation now dripped from every line. "Ms. James, please respond. The company's future depends on this. We are prepared to offer accommodations to your preferences." And then, finally, one that made her laugh. A short, frantic message forwarded from Graham himself. "Skyler, be reasonable. This is bigger than both of us. Just sign it." She read it twice. The same man who had sneered at her, called her trash as if she were less than human, was now reduced to pleading on a glowing screen. Skyler didn't reply. She didn't need to, because silence was doing the work for her. Night fell. The city lights flickered against her window, bright and restless. Somewhere downtown, Graham was still pacing, still shouting, still trying to bend the world to his will. But the world wasn't bending this time. It was shifting. Toward her. Skyler poured herself another cup of coffee, the steam curling into the air like smoke. She didn't feel joy. She didn't feel triumph. She felt something sharper, steadier. Control. For years, Graham had mocked her voice, cut her off mid-sentence, dismissed her as disposable. Now her silence was the loudest sound in the room. And the man who once seemed untouchable was discovering what it meant to beg. The email came just after midnight. Skyler was sitting at her kitchen table, the city outside her window humming with neon and noise, when the subject line flashed across her screen. "Formal proposal, Ridgewell Partners." Her pulse spiked. She clicked. "Ms. James," the message began, "in light of recent developments, we would like to formally invite you to serve as an independent consultant to Ridgewell Partners. Your authority within the existing framework makes you indispensable. This role would grant you not only full recognition, but the autonomy you deserve." Skyler exhaled slowly, her hand tightening around her coffee mug. For weeks, her silence had spoken louder than anything she could say. And now the rival company, the very partner Graham had tried to dominate, was extending a hand, not with mockery, not with arrogance, but with respect. Respect. The one thing Graham had denied her at every turn. Across town, the boardroom was a war zone. Graham's voice thundered through the glass walls, his temper spilling over in bursts that rattled even his most loyal directors. "She's playing you," he roared. "She planted that clause to sabotage me. You really think she deserves to dictate the future of this company?" But the faces around the table told a different story. They weren't cowed anymore. They weren't nodding along like they once had. The silence after his tirade was deafening. One director finally spoke, her voice steady, cutting through his rage. "Deserve has nothing to do with it. The legal framework is clear. Without her signature, this deal doesn't exist." Graham slammed his fist against the table, the sound sharp enough to make papers jump. But the impact was hollow. For the first time in years, his anger wasn't command. It was desperation. Skyler read Ridgewell's email again, line by line. Independent consultant. Full authority. Autonomy. It was everything Graham had stripped from her. Everything she had been denied in the glass halls of Halloway Systems. And yet, temptation was dangerous. She knew that. If she accepted, she wouldn't just be stepping into the spotlight. She'd be stepping into the fire. Aligning herself with Ridgewell would make her the enemy in Graham's eyes, and in the eyes of anyone still loyal to him. But the thought of walking into a boardroom where her voice mattered, where no one could cut her off mid-sentence, where her expertise wasn't treated like trash, it was intoxicating. She closed her laptop and pressed her palms against the cool surface of the table. She couldn't decide tonight. Not yet. The next morning, the news cycle had sharpened into a blade. Halloway merger in jeopardy. Investors losing patience. Viral clip of CEO's outburst sparks debate on corporate culture. Anchors leaned forward in their chairs, their voices measured but laced with judgment. "This isn't just about a missing signature," one commentator said. "This is about leadership. This is about respect in the workplace. You don't humiliate a 15-year veteran in front of your entire company and expect business as usual." The clip played again and again, Graham's sneer, his venom dripping as he spat the word trash. America didn't need context. They knew cruelty when they saw it. And now the court of public opinion was turning into a jury. That evening, Skyler's phone buzzed. Another international number. She answered, her voice steady. "Ms. James," a woman said, her tone warm but precise. "This is Elena Porter, senior executive with Ridgewell Partners. I hope you received our proposal." "I did." "Good. Then I'll be direct. We believe you are the key to ensuring this merger succeeds. And frankly, we'd rather work with you than with Vexler. His reputation," she paused delicately, "has deteriorated." Skyler let the words hang. She could almost hear Elena's smile through the line. "Think carefully, Ms. James," Elena continued. "Your silence has already reshaped the balance of power. Imagine what your voice could do." The line clicked off, leaving Skyler in the glow of her apartment, her phone still warm against her ear. She set it down slowly, her heart beating steady heavy. For the first time, she wasn't just holding something back. She was being invited forward. Meanwhile, chaos inside Halloway Systems deepened. Leaked reports trickled out. Investors threatening withdrawal, directors holding side conversations about contingency leadership. Graham stormed through hallways, demanding loyalty, but loyalty was evaporating. And in every whispered corner, the same name surfaced. Skyler James. The woman he had called trash. The woman he had tried to erase. Now the gatekeeper. Skyler stood on her balcony as the city buzzed beneath her, alive with Friday night energy. She let the hum of traffic, the glow of neon, the rise and fall of voices wash over her. The world was moving fast. Too fast. She closed her eyes, breathing deep. She hadn't answered Ridgewell yet. She hadn't responded to Han. She hadn't replied to Graham's frantic emails that grew more incoherent by the hour, because she didn't need to. Power, she realized, didn't always come from action. Sometimes it came from restraint. From knowing that every second she stayed silent, Graham's empire cracked a little further. But temptation was coiling around her now, stronger than before, because silence had carried her this far. And her voice? Her voice could finish the job.
Part 2 is still on the channel. Please watch and follow.